Hey guys, Chaos Camera here with another Hell Loose news type video talking about the roadmap once again. This will be part 2 of the roadmap video I released earlier this week on Monday. This will be talking about the Q&A that the devs just got done doing, and we'll talk about that. Just a disclaimer up front, I'm just going to be having a lot of random footage up here, but I'll at least be giving you my notes of what I did. So if there's something I missed, please let me know, but this is at least what I gathered from it. So just that's what I'll give you for what you essentially need to know. But I will leave a link down in the description so you can take a look at the stream yourself. But I will be throwing up my notes, maybe some typos in there. Just work with what I got. But let's get into it. Starting off with the update schedule, or how the updates will run for the rest of the year. So the first question here is, what is the timeline for the roadmap's goals? Is it till the end of 2025? So at least in summary, for 2025, after Tobruk, there will be 3 updates afterwards. There won't be many updates. This is something that they stress, that there's not going to be a lot of random smaller updates. They're going to have a lot of bigger updates, at least for what I could gather. And they specifically said 3 updates after Tobruk. So after update 17, there will be 3 updates covering essentially everything. Maybe some other patches, maybe a couple smaller ones, but at least they specifically said the 3 updates. So, or at least the 3 major updates. So there's that. Next question we go to is, what are you going to do to my beloved Stalingrad? So they did acknowledge the whole Stalin lag meme, and they are looking to the design side of things. They are sweeping through the map to see what needs to be rebalanced and what needs to be changed in general. The main thing that they did mention was the central control points and what needs to be fixed there, at least in terms of balancing. Some areas do need to be improved, including, like they said, the lag issues, HQ balancing, and the hill in the middle for the Germans. They do want to keep the map identity the same as possible without changing it too much. And they also did make a reference, like some of the things with the buildings and design with the terrain, stuff like that. So they do want to look to the map, but they don't want to change it too much. They mentioned making it similar to how they reworked Purple Heart Lane. Yes, it's still fundamentally the same map, but with a couple added things and change things to make it either A, a better map in general, or B, to make it run better. So there's that. Next one here is going to be a big one for some people. Would you be able to share a bit more information about the new map on the Eastern Front? So, just starting off, unfortunately, it will not be Berlin. They did specifically say how it would probably be the ultimate swan song for Hell Loose, but for now, it won't be Berlin. It will not be Moscow either. They said it would be... The Germans never really actually made it to the city, and they didn't want to make just a completely made-up map. The details they did give, though, is that this map has been requested several times. It will be set in the summer of 1943, and it will be a urban-style map. Early suggestions from people I've talked to already as well, and what the comments were saying, is that it might, or at least most likely, be Slomensk. So that's what it is. They do want to try to get a PT out as fast as they can for the map, so to the point where it'll be rough around the edges, but it'll be functional so they can get your feedback. Another big one, where is the Pacific Theater? It's on the mind of the devs. They do say it needs to be done, but properly, which is something I have also said as well. I have a video talking about the Pacific Theater. There is a lot that would need to change in HLL for it to work. They will revisit in the future, as they did also mention they currently have about 35 developers on the team right now, as noted by Carl, the senior level designer. So it's something they wanted to reference, if they want to make sure they have a good development team before they even take part in making a Pacific Theater. Next, we have what happened to the defensive Danzig map, and since it was mentioned on a previous roadmap. A PT will be brought out at some point. It is in their vault. It may or may not come out, but the play of the map will be a lot different than what it is in current state of Hell Loose. And it is on the table to be added, and how it will be added will be dependent. They do say stay tuned for more info. So it's something that has not been completely erased, but simply shelved. And it's been shelved for the last couple of years. And they do have it. They've actually played on it a couple times in their own little dev servers. But they are still debating how they want to add it, if they do add it. Is it going to be just a small little area, or is it going to be an actual big flat, like, huge map? So no real specifics on that front, but at least they did mention that. Next up are the Canadians / Juno Beach on the table. So they do know the map was leaked, and that was specifically mentioned. There was a design for the map, and it is playable, that they have for the devs. Different elements compared to the other beaches. It is not scheduled to come out this year or currently in the future, but it will be kept in mind. Will we ever get the finished forces is the next question. Again, everything I am saying is summary. Just take out what you can. A map was to be designed. I think they did mention a specific map. I did not catch it, unfortunately. but there is no immediate plans to release the finish. The balancing for the map and the factions as well was to be different than like any of the other factions. They would love to explore it further though, and they do say, quote, never say never. Next question we have is, how will these new vehicles be implemented and what type will they be? So they are prototyping a new type of tank, which means it's not going to be a light, medium, heavy, or recon tank. It's going to be a different tank, like a tank destroyer or something along those lines. I didn't specifically say that, but as to say what kind of class it is, that's just an example. I just use tank destroyer because that's the most likely one. And they do want to get a PTE or a public test area as soon as they can ready. They did not say what was to be added, so very few details regarding the new type of tanks, but at least it's a different type of tank. Keeping with the armor theme, the next question they addressed was, can you elaborate on the armor rework? So they did talk about how they want to make the armor experience more realistic and apply individual stats to each tank, such as turret rotate speed, rate of fire, acceleration, were at least 3 examples they mentioned. Keeping once again with the tank theme, have you got any plans for a tank commander rework, such as things like popping hatches and stuff like that where they could peer outside the tank? They think they can try it. They are open to suggestions, and they will be a question more of if the HL or Hell Loose code system can handle it, but they do want to see what they can do. So it's something they at least seemed, at least from their expressions and what they were saying and how they were speaking, that they were open to try it, and it was something that they would like to look into. Another armor question. Will you be adding snow camo vehicles found in Elsinore Ridge to other snow-based maps? So they do plan on adding more camos to other tanks in other maps. They did not have the capacity to do so until now. They will look into other maps and see if other tanks essentially could fit the bill for that. So they'll go back to the older maps. They did specifically say that they would look at the Russian tanks and try to update them, especially for a map like Kharkov. So there's that. Next question, moving away from tanks into artillery, is that, can you give us more details on the arty rework and will mortars be part of it? So they did mention for this specific roadmap, mortars are not going to be part of the change, but it is not completely off the table. They did mention the stale gameplay with the whole recon versus arty meta and how it gets repetitive, so they are looking into what they could do to change the artillery as a whole. They didn't really offer a lot of details on this specific section, but they did say some of the community ideas, again, kind of hard to speak right now, are in line with what they have in mind. Next up, in coordination with the armor changes, are there likely to be any changes to the resource system at all? Now, they did not specifically say anything with this. They did say that they're happy to prototype it and see what could be done, but nothing, like I said, was overall said about the subject in major detail. Next one is a big one for one of our classes, or loadouts you could get. How are you planning to rework Medic? What is the goal? And they do acknowledge that the Medic needs some love, and they're looking at the stats of the Medic, such as things like the loadouts, like the weapons they're given, the ammo, revive speed, and just those were the main things mentioned. Adding new things like the medic box, or like updating the medic box, I should say, and it adds a buff light node. So for those who don't know, if you're around the munitions node, you can get your ammo boxes back at half the time. Or at least it cuts off 2.5 minutes of it, regardless of where you're at in your standings. And the same thing can be said for the manpower node if you're within 50 meters and you get your manpower or your supply box back. So they are looking to maybe do something with that and throwing down a medic heal box or something like that and giving it a buff of some sort. They didn't specifically say that. I'm more spitballing what they have, but that was at least an idea they've thrown around. They haven't said anything set in stone, obviously. Next, we have a bipod question. With the bipod rework, will you be adding the FG42 and bar bipods? Ultimately, they want to bring those bipods for those guns, but they're unsure if they can get it out in time. So they did say how they're going to have a schedule for the bipod update, or like when they do add bipods, they're going to try and get the bipods for the FG42 and bar, but they're unsure if they can get it done in time. They also mentioned how, at least with the rework in general, they want to make bipods, quote-unquote, more robust and be able to be deployed where you would expect it to work. So, as there is a lot of issues with bipods, but they also make sure it is still balanced for the game. Next up we have, will there be any plans to add anti-tank structures for the Soviet engineer class, since there is no like Hedgehog or Belgian Gate equivalent for the Soviets? They might look into it, but there is currently no plans to add anything at this very moment. After that, we go into more DLC questions. Will thematic DLC uniforms work for the current maps and factions in the game, or only new maps? So they are going to look at the factions and see what factions need more attention for their uniforms. There'll always be new DLCs for the new maps because, I mean, that's kind of a given. But they will look back at the existing maps and factions and see what they can add. Next up, we have, are there any plans to allow any sort of modding? And if I recall, this was a question back on one of their older Q&As. So there's something they are not really looking into. They do see the value in something like that, having a modding community, like with other games. But that's why they're looking more into the server customization stuff. So in the roadmap, they said there was a recon thing, or RCon, and they're looking to maybe see if they can have server owners adjust their servers to have different things involved in their games. What that means, I do not know. They didn't really specify, but they at least specified that the server owners may have more of a say in the lobbies and how they would work. Again, what that means, I'm not sure. Moving on to a sound effects and visual effects question, can you elaborate on some specific items that you are focusing on for VFX and SFX? So they are making changes to the newer maps and will try to update stuff as they can, such as for the fire on trees, smoke trails, etc. They're looking at a wish list from the community on what they want to see for the visual effects. Vehicle explosions have been requested as well, since they seem very 2D among other issues. For sound effects, as part of the armor system rework, they will look at tank audio sounds, such as like ricochets, just tank noises in general, ambient sound effects, victory songs, etc. Next, we'll be getting an update for the in-game assets flickering from a distance. They're working on this currently, but they have already been doing this for the newer maps. They're going back through the older maps and seeing what they can do to fix or replace things causing issues. Railroads was another specific thing mentioned, that they need more time to work with them. They would have to look at the flickering for some of the in-game assets and see how bad they are so they can figure out what they need to do. Next we have, can we expect better rendering distances and FPS improvements? So they did have some prototypes in place for certain maps and are looking into things to try and just add them in, such as pause LODs when aiming was mentioned specifically. They have to look at older maps and see what they could do for their animation stuff. Animation lotting was also being looked at as well. Moving on back to another map-based question, Omaha Beach is one of the most iconic maps. Are there any plans to make it more appealing to the players? Now, what the devs said with this is they would like to find out why the map isn't being played as often as others. They can look at the map and see if it needs to be reworked, such as with the hard points or objective markers. They do want to keep it as realistic for what it is, because they did talk about the historical significance and how hard it was for the U.S. troops that were deployed to get off the beach, and again, the obstacles that it presents, such as, you know, the Americans have to be on the beach and the Germans have the high ground, so stuff like that. But it's something that they can look at. And the last truly official question they had was, how do you currently look at and utilize community suggestions? So as a team, they admit they do look at a lot of stuff on YouTube, Discord, and Reddit, and they do discuss stuff that people say and do. They do take the data from people like the so-called war correspondents, like Soul Sniper, Fresh Baked Goods, Rasbora, etc. And sometimes they also look at random messages on Discord. What they do from the war correspondence, what they specifically talked about, is they take the data that the war correspondents have been given, and the war correspondence, what they do is they try to simplify it and make it as easy to process and digest as possible for the devs so that they can maybe look at certain things. So that is that. Now, they did go on to talk about some unofficial questions that some of the guys were talking about. So I'll just breeze through them just in case, just give it a full breakdown. Someone asked if they could play games with the devs. So the devs said that they can work on scheduling some games. Maybe they did joke about maybe getting the war correspondents versus the devs. So there's that. Another question was asked, can we pick up supply boxes if you misplace it? Or is there anything to do with that? So they did want to potentially prototype it because they said it would be a good idea. So because maybe you screwed up on a garrison placement, you place your supplies, and, well, you can't build a garrison. So then you gotta wait the time to get your supply box back. So that's something. Will SLs be able to adjust their squads without being dead? They would have to look into it, but it's something they'd want to try, at least from what they were saying and their expressions. A console PTE, or test server, essentially, has been asked for, but they do have a Microsoft program like what they did for the console server browser, and it worked like that. For those who have questions about that, go back to my sneak peek video about the console server browser, since I am a console player, and at least look at how to do that, because I'll be honest here, I can't remember how it works, but that video should talk about how that worked and probably what they were talking about with a console test server, essentially. From there, someone asked about the updates being at the same time between console and PC. So they do make sure that the console version and PC version are on par with each other. And at the very least, they do try to make sure that both sides are getting the exact same thing as close as possible. Another question was asked about competitive scene involvement. They do want to try and at least support the competitive community, but nothing was really noted about what they would do about maybe giving out free servers or making some sort of like esports thing. But they did say that a lot of people on the dev team are interested in the competitive scene and are very like happy to see the community create their own things and are happy to support them. Another thing here, essentially asking if PC and console compatibility is possible. It was a very weirdly asked question, so they tried to work with it if you go back in the stream. And they said, yes, it is possible, very possible, but is it the right thing to do? So they were not too sure about that. So that's the main thing. If they did ever look at that, that's what they look at. Personally, I don't want that. I think that would make it too hard for the console guys because they would just get sniped by someone who has an awesome PC from like 800 yards out, and then they're going to wonder what happened. So another thing here was half tracks, if they're able to be locked for certain people. Not really a specific question that was asked. It was one I was trying to ask as well at some point during the stream. Was PTE'd a long time ago, but it was taken out because of how the player base was using it or something along those lines. But it can be looked at again. So there's that. The last thing I'll touch on here is that they do have another Q&A scheduled for talking just about Tobruk, and it's on next Friday. So tune into that on Twitch. But that essentially is the breakdown. Now, again, if I missed something, please feel free to put it in, as I'm not perfect. I'm making this video as fast as I can to give you guys the information. And a lot of this is what I took away from it to try and translate it. So, like I said, I'm not perfect. Also, I'm a little under the weather. But I hope you got something out of this video. I'm honestly kind of optimistic, but again, I do have a reasonable amount of suspicion, and I will not be happy at least until we see some good progress. But I'm at least maintaining some sort of positivity with this. But I hope you got something from the video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one. Take care.